Welcome back to another edition of Animal General Podcast with me, your host, Dr. Mike Hutchinson. Today I'm going to talk about something a little bit dirty. It's going to be talking about feces, but you'll be interested in how we're going to use these feces. Believe it or not, in humans and in animals, we're starting to use feces to treat GI diseases, things like diarrhea, or maybe you've heard of C. diff in the hospitals, these resistant bugs that people pick up or acquire after being on antibiotics, and then there's not an antibiotic to cure them, to get better. Well, maybe feces will be the answer to that. But it reminds me of a story we're being told this is a new technology being used by trailblazing doctors and veterinarians around the world. And when I got out of school back in 1986, I was in my first week of practice. I was riding with my mentor, Dr. Bruce Koenig, and we were talking about horses at the time. And he asked me, he said, Michael, how are they treating laminitis or teaching you how to treat laminitis in horses today? So I'm thinking, wow, I'll tell him what I know. And I just regurgitated what I had learned, how we were treating laminitis and how we were taught to treat it. And he started smiling. He was looking off. He was driving. He was looking off and he was smiling, kind of chuckling. And I said, did I get it wrong? And he said, no. He said, we used to do that 25 years ago. He said, and it's coming back around. He said, we tried so many things that didn't work. We're going back around in that circle to use things that we used to use when he first graduated from veterinary school. And this story about these fecal transfers reminded me of that because when I was a kid and we were working on farms, we were doing farm calls, this was commonly employed in calves that had diarrhea or foals that had diarrhea or piglets that had diarrhea. We would take feces, and this is basically what a fecal transfer is. We'd take feces from a healthy donor. We would strain it, add a little bit of saline solution or fluid to it, and then we would either tube it or give it by an enema to the patient. And guess what? We expected them to get better. Over 90% of them did. And that's what they're touting today. So my topic is timely because I think it's fate. I had 3 questions asking me about this today. I haven't even thought about it, to be honest with you. I haven't even thought about it for years until I got these 3 questions. I went on the internet and scoured it, looking for information, wondering why these people were asking me, do I know anything about fecal transfers? And I wanted to see, did something get published? Did somebody talk about it recently? And the only thing I could find was a colleague of mine, Dr. Karen Becker, who does a natural podcast and also does some video casts, I should say. She has a webpage. I found that she had talked about it. She had interviewed a doctor on this exact technology back in 2015. So again, it's not new, but more people are starting to talk about it. So it's timely. Fate brought us here. Let me talk about it. 3 questions about it. So why would I even consider using that? Well, you know me, I like to talk about the things that we do in veterinary medicine. We get animals and we try to find solutions for them, and it's not always going to be with a pharmaceutical. It's nice when we can give a pill. It's easy when we can give a pill, and 7 days later they're better, and it's over with. You're done giving the pills, and the animal's healthy again. But it doesn't always work that way in life, does it? It doesn't work that way in people. It doesn't work that way in animals. So the other thing we're trying to do is we're giving them something more natural. Now, you've heard me talking about, say an animal gets diarrhea. I love to use things like colostrum LD. I've spoken about that many times. The colostrum is in this liposome delivery system. It means it's coated so that when we give it to them, it goes into the stomach, doesn't get digested, and passes on into the intestines where it does a lot of good. Colostrum is mother's first milk, and that's what passes a lot of immunity to animals too when they're whelped or when they're born or when they're calved or when they're foaled or when they're farrowed. We will give them, or they'll get suckle from their mother, and they'll get this wonderful protection that will give them what we call passive immunity. Well, what if they miss that? We want them to suckle that colostrum in the first 24 hours if possible. Actually, the first 6 hours if possible, because it absorbs those large molecules that are in that colostrum into their bloodstream, into their system to help protect them from diseases that they're going to get exposed to in the farm or outdoors or anywhere. Well, if they don't get it in that first 24 hours, we use colostrum anyways because it's loaded with things like immunoglobulins, which are antibodies that will help protect the surface of the intestine. IgA is one of those immunoglobulins that helps protect the surface of the intestine. And what it will do is bind to disease-causing organisms that are in that intestine and carry them out. It won't absorb into the bloodstream because they're too large to absorb after that first day of life. But they will give surface protection, and that is key because 95% of all the disease-causing organisms will enter through the mouth and go through the digestive system. So I talk about colostrum. That's one thing we can do. Another thing that I talk about ad nauseum is good bacteria, probiotics with prebiotics. Prebiotics are the food for the good bacteria so that it stays alive. And then when we administer that to our animals, they will repopulate, hopefully, and help get the proper balance back. We call that the microbiome of the gut, or some people call it the microbiota. But what it is the good bacteria, or the army of good guys that should be in our intestines at all times and in our digestive system. When we get to that great balance, those animals, their neurotransmitters in their brain are functioning properly. Their entire body is functioning properly. So those neurotransmitters make them feel good. So if your gut feels good, your body feels good. So let's get on to this fecal transfer. I told you that I will try things like antibiotics. Say a dog gets Giardia infection, which is a parasite. It picks it up outdoors through the urine of wildlife that gets into the water supply. They lap up the mud puddle, and now they get this horrible Giardia infection that causes diarrhea, maybe even blood in that diarrhea. We'll put them on antibiotics, medications to treat it, and fortunately, most of those animals respond beautifully, and they get better. However, some of those animals end up with chronic disease. It does a lot of destruction to their immune system. Maybe they just aren't good at fighting that particular bug off, and the antibiotics kept it in check but didn't completely eliminate it, and the immune system couldn't take over and couldn't take care of it. So what about those pets? Well, that's where we might consider a fecal transfer, where we take a donor animal that is normal, and we can even culture them and make sure they have the right bacteria in that feces. I know this sounds gross, but it's something that we should pay attention to because it's becoming popular all over again. And I think that's a good thing with all these superbugs and all these resistant bacteria. So what we're doing is we're taking that feces from the normal animal, we're straining it after we check it and make sure that donor has healthy bacteria in it. We strain it. We add some solution to it just to give volume, if you will, usually a sterile saline solution, and we can administer it back to that animal through an enema or even orally if we do it through a tube. It can be administered different ways. I know that's horribly gross, but it's something that we're doing to try to cure an issue that seems to be intractable. It seems to be very difficult to cure. And remember, don't just live and let live, but live and help live.